Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 67th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1994. A movie geek with a passion for cinema and a desire to shake things up made his mark with one of the most influential movies of the 90s. That person was Quentin Tarantino, and the movie was Pulp Fiction. With witty dialogue, unconventional storytelling, and star turns by John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Willis, and Uma Thurman, the movie wedged its way into the Oscar race as the cool critics' darling that unexpectedly made over $100 million at the box office. But when it came to Best Picture, it had the misfortune of going up against an even bigger darling, Forrest Gump, which took home the lion's share of awards. So why was Pulp Fiction unable to go all the way and win Best Picture? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Pulp Fiction. Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, as always, Kevin Jacobson. And today with me, I have another very special guest, someone who's been a loyal fan of the show from the beginning, someone who is a writer for InSession Film, who is a podcaster for their Extra Film division, and whole other things related to film and Oscars and everything. Please welcome Ryan McQuade.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I feel so excited about finally being on the show. I listen to the show every week at work, and it is one of the pure joys to always get to talk about the Oscars, but especially get to talk about this particular year, which is always an interesting year, which is 1994.
Love 1994. Mm-hmm. So many classics, so many interesting elements happening. So you ready to jump into this?
I am so ready to jump into this.
Because today we're going to be talking about a very, very famous movie here, and that movie is Pulp Fiction.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. It's a little scene, little indie. It's a cute little quirky thing. So let's get into a quick summary of Pulp Fiction. It is a crime comedy drama of sorts about a group of criminals whose lives intersect in a series of violent and unexpected ways. And we've got these two hitmen, Jules Winfield and Vincent Vega, who are tasked with retrieving a briefcase belonging to their boss, Marcellus Wallace, that was taken by some of his associates. And Vincent is also instructed to take care of Marcellus's wife, Mia, while he is away on business, and they have an adventurous night out together. And then the third major story we have involves Marcellus paying a boxer, Butch Coolidge, to lose a fight, but he goes against those orders. And along the way, we have things basically going wrong at every turn. So the film was directed by Quentin Tarantino, who co-wrote the screenplay with Roger Avary. It stars John Travolta as Vincent Vega, Samuel L. Jackson as Jules, Bruce Willis as Butch, Uma Thurman as Mrs. Mia Wallace, Ving Rhames as Marcellus Wallace. We also got Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Amanda Plummer, Eric Stoltz, Rosanna Arquette, Maria de Medeiros, and Christopher Walken. Mm-hmm. So the film made $107 million at the U.S. box office and $213 million worldwide. And it was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won only one of those. And it was not Best Picture. So, Ryan, what are your thoughts on Pulp Fiction?
I think the thing about Pulp Fiction you have to talk about is how important this film is up at the front. I don't think you can underestimate the power that this film has had over its 20-something years of existence. It is the single most influential film of its decade. I will say, not just by us as prognosticators and historians of film and of the Oscars, but even by its own industry. This is a film that has inspired so many directors, both independent and mainstream, and it's mostly because of its director. We cannot underemphasize Quentin's script, the characters, his sense of style. His storytelling is off the charts in this film. His nonlinear structure is what just born and bred so many more copycats like it throughout the decades. I mean, he is a master at it, and this created his own brand. I mean, he had Reservoir Dogs come out. It's a very modest film. It's not, in my opinion, that great of a film. You can tell it's a first-time director's
It's a first film for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you can see where he's going. You can see that there's something else there that he can use in his toolbox for future films. And literally, the next film is when he gets all those tools working.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fantastic. I mean, the characters in this are historically memorable. It has many of these actors' finest roles. I think this is Bruce Willis' best performance. I think this is John Travolta's best performance. Uma's second best, behind Kill Bill, which is another film that Quentin made for her. I think this gave us Samuel L. Jackson in the biggest of ways, and it even gave us, performances from Harvey Keitel and Christopher Walken and Amanda Plummer and Tim Roth that are so memorable. And even Tarantino, I will say, who does make an appearance in this film as one of his own characters.
Yep.
This is probably his best performance that he's done in any of his cameos of his films. This film does have problems. I think it does have some issues because it is 20 years old. I think, especially with actually Quentin Tarantino's character that he wrote for himself that he plays, I think that is a very troublesome character. Obviously, the producers of this film are a very troubling bunch, to say the least. I think that Quentin himself is a very controversial figure. So I think we could save all those discussions for a little bit later, because I know we're going to talk about them in terms of the race itself. But as for the film, this is my favorite, my second favorite Quentin Tarantino film. I think his best is Kill Bill, in my opinion. And I consider Kill Bill one film. So come at me if you don't think it's one film. I think it's one film. And that jerk producer, who shall not be named, made him cut it into two films.
Yes.
But I think what's so interesting about this film is its sense of style. At that time, it was so jarring. It is a jarring picture. I mean, it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and if you literally watch the DVD extras for this film, Clint Eastwood, which is like, I always find that's really interesting that Clint Eastwood gave him this award, because like the most conservative down guy in Hollywood gives like the most outlandish film the Palme d'Or.
Yeah.
But there was a cavalcade of cheers, but a cavalcade of boos from this film. And so its reaction was jarring at the time. It's still, to this day, when you first see it, there are scenes that just blow you away that I'm sure we'll talk about, that are in no other films like it. And I mean, it's generally his masterpiece. I mean, he's written a lot of great scripts, but there's nothing that has been, I think, as perfect as this. And so, I mean, we can get into specifics, but I kind of want to know what you think about the film.
Yes. And that's a very good kind of overview of all of the elements in play here. I think the movie is indeed pretty much a masterpiece. And, he does say in Inglourious Basterds, this may be my masterpiece, but I think in this movie, this is his true masterpiece. It's very influential. The screenplay is just beyond anything. It's just the way it's constructed, the dialogue alone. There's a reason that this screenplay has been studied and copied and made into derivative product over the 90s especially, and people trying to copy the sort of success of his blending of genres and dialogue and everything, especially in the crime genre, especially in the 90s. and they just can't really match this unique alchemy that he creates for this entire movie. I love how the movie is very postmodern. It's very intertextual in blending a lot of different genres like the film noir and blaxploitation and, you know, gangster movies and sort of that goofy stream of consciousness comedic style in a lot of the scenes between Jules and Vincent Vega. So that's really fascinating to me how he manages to blend all of these different genres while still making it feel like this cohesive piece of art and never feeling like it's anything out of place. And I do love how the dialogue, even though a lot of it sounds like it's trailing off at times, not entirely relevant to what they're actually doing in the plot, I think at the same time it just helps to solidify these characters and make you care about them and make them compelling. And, you know, and that elevates it beyond the typical sort of crime genre that we're in. And also just all of the performances, as you outlined, are so iconic. I love Uma Thurman in this movie. I think she's so captivating, very alluring. And, you know, part of that is how Tarantino kind of films her, which is very like lots of close-ups and kind of erotic at times. But I think she manages to create this fascinating character who's just kind of this wild child, this gangster's wife who just does whatever she wants. But at the same time, she's also been through a lot of things, and you can see all of that kind of in her face, I think.
It's like when he's shooting her, it's like he's discovering her as much as we are discovering her as the audience. Absolutely. I mean, this is her big break, and she's fantastic. And he took a lot of risks, you know, with this film. It was not a safe picture. I mean, nothing about this movie is safe with any stretch of the imagination, including even its lead actor. Look, Travolta was not a box office guy at the time. He was kind of damaged goods. And
this was his big comeback.
Yeah, and what was so interesting about it in doing research for this film, because I've talked about this film before many times, is that I'm going to say his name, so everybody cover your ears. Weinstein wanted still my heart. Weinstein wanted Daniel Day-Lewis to play Vincent Vega. And I love Daniel Day-Lewis. I think he is one of the greatest actors of all time.
How can you
but
not?
In no damn way could he have played this character. This was made for Travolta. And
I literally can't even imagine that, honestly.
I mean, I kind of could, but not like the dancing scene. Like if he had to do it would be so bad. Like it would be really bad at Jack Rabbit and Slim's. Like that whole scene wouldn't make any sense. It just it wouldn't work. It would not work.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sam Jackson in this film gets to just chew dialogue. And every bit of dialogue he gets, he is the smartest guy in the room. And he knows it. And he plays it with so much confidence. And he's so fantastic in this film. And what's so interesting about this film to me, rewatching this is that we know that he cuts back and forth within the story. It kind of starts at the end point and then goes back to the beginning, and then it goes back and forth, and it uses like that nonlinear structure so perfectly. But if you do it as just a straight narrative, this movie works just the same. And I would even argue its ending would be better than what we get in the end, because what we get at the beginning of this film, is you know, the beginning of the film, and then it's like the second act turns into like what would be the third act. And then the third act is the second act. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So the way it ends, it kind of ends weird, like in this diner. But if it ends with Butch and that, you know, Zed's dead, baby, and driving off with that music, I actually think that would be pretty goddamn perfect, to say the least. I don't think he has to do the nonlinear structure, but he does. And it's kind of weird because, like, you know, your main character, quote unquote, is Travolta, and he gets whacked off halfway through your picture, and you're like, well, wait, he's like the headliner build. What the hell? And then we go back to it, and it's like we kind of forget at that point that he's gone, and that the whole thing that's happened with Bruce Willis's character, we forget that as an audience in that third act because there's that sense of tension that he has, and it's so wonderful, and I love it so much. And you mentioned these characters. There's not a sympathetic hero among them. There's not a hero among them. They all are terrible human beings. Like, they're drug dealers, gangsters, robbers, people that have so many faults, may not have a soul. Wink, wink to a certain box. But
so you know about this too. We'll get back to that later.
We'll get back to that later.
Yeah.
But you are enjoying spending time with them, and that's what's so great about Tarantino is through his films, he makes unsympathetic characters sympathetic and rootable. Like, you're not supposed to root for Hans Landa. You're not supposed to root for Calvin Candy. You're not supposed to root for Bill. You're not supposed to root for Marcellus Wallace because he's technically your bad guy.
Right.
But something happens to him and you kind of start rooting for him to get out of that. And it's fascinating. It's perfect screenwriting. How to take the audience's expectations of what is a hero and what is a villain and totally turn them around. And I mean, even Jules and Vincent, they're very unconventional heroes.
Very unconventional.
But
they make mistakes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they shot Marvin in the head. That's a big mistake. You know what I mean? That's the whole third act.
Expectations. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's fantastic. And I want to, the thing that he doesn't get credit for, I think, in this film, because we talk about the characters and the writing and everything, is his direction. His sense of scope as a second-time director is breathtaking. I mean, there's a reason why he's going back to Los Angeles for his next film, is because that's where he worked the best.
I completely agree with that.
He gets it. Like, this is a movie that isn't about really LA, but it's for LA. It's not for the Hollywood and the glitz and glamour. It is the underbelly, the undercut, the nastiness of an environment of a major metropolitan city, and what can happen when desperate people are working together. And it's a fascinating look, and it holds up in every sense except the stuff with Tarantino, which is something that's just direct. Which just not even the outside elements. His character in the film,
too, absolutely,
and his dialogue is very troubling.
Yes,
it's very troubling.
Yes,
and
very
there's
no.
So. I mean, you can kind of see where he's going with it. Like, he's worked with Jules before, so he's comfortable. But it goes to that same thing of like, white people should never be comfortable in saying the N-word, even if the person around them of color says it's okay. Like, that's something that is not okay.
And there's something a little bit troubling and kind of gross about this. Is someone who wrote the screenplay, who is directing the film, who has basically chosen to also be in the movie saying the N-word multiple times on multiple occasions.
It's a rough scene.
Yeah.
It's a rough scene.
So it's things like that I think give people like me and others kind of a lot of pause when it comes to Tarantino, the person, I suppose. In addition to everything that's gone on with Uma Thurman, which we've found out recently, it's a little bit hazy when it comes to those issues. But looking at the movie in a vacuum, I did want to go back to the non-traditional way that it is presented, not in chronological order, because you mentioned that you think it would have worked just fine or possibly better if it was just in chronological order. I would say that I actually like that it is not presented in that order. I think it keeps things more engaging, and it makes you have to think more as an audience member, which I always appreciate. And, at that time, 1994, Hollywood had kind of gotten into this mode, obviously, of how to tell stories. And when this movie comes along, it is, I think, very refreshing. And I think it opened up a lot of possibility for people as storytellers, including major people like Christopher Nolan with Memento and things like that. So,
no, I agree. And I mean, you talk about storytelling and just being the blandness. Spoiler alert, that's what won Best Picture. I mean, it's a film that doesn't take risks. And this film is ballsy. And that's what
Very ballsy.
that is what the independent movement of the time was, the
Yep.
Coens and Fincher and then especially Quentin. They took risks, and you got to have some stake in the game. And Miramax, regardless of they play such a huge role in this time period and beyond.
Yeah, that is certainly something that I've been discussing throughout my show. So,
and they are the root problem of a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
But without them, we don't have iconic film moments. We don't have these discussions. We don't have this podcast, I think, without Miramax Film, because they changed the game, not just on the film, but how you run a campaign.
Yeah.
In the worst ways possible. I'm not saying that it's a good thing what they did, what Miramax, which then turned into the Weinstein Company, did, but you have to remember this about the Weinstein Company too. Through all their campaigns and their domination at the Oscars and their Shakespeare in Loves and English Patient too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Their boy, their cash cow, their star, their golden goose was Quentin Tarantino. They found this rare guy from a video store and turned him into a brand. Quentin is one of, I think, maybe a handful of directors. I would say Scorsese, Spielberg, obviously, Nolan, Tarantino, Fincher. I would say at the current moment, maybe Catherine Bigelow. Maybe that's about it. Paul Thomas Anderson and the Coens. Those are it. Those are all those. They can go into any studio they want, basically sit down and they'll get a check.
Yeah.
Everyone else has to work for that check unless you are bought out by Marvel. Then you get your checks, monthly in the mail.
Yes.
And it took a long time to convince people that this was going to be, I think, a real factor in the race. And I know we'll talk about that later, but this film is not. You look at the other four nominees, it's not even close in the stratosphere in terms of being comparable to any one of those films.
It is very much the apple in about barrel of oranges.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's, it is the most juiciest apple you could have. It is a red ball put over Ving Rhames' mouth kind of apple, if it were. You know what I mean? Good. It is and it's not shy about it. There's nothing shy about this film. It is not unapologetic in any sense of the imagination, because it's there for the audience to be kind of shocked, but it's also for them to be retrospective, in that we as Americans at that time, when we went to the movies, we went for escapism. And we still kind of go for that, or we tend to go for that.
Mm-hmm.
But this film was one of the first ones of the 90s and now beyond to make you actually think when you went out of that. Like, why am I rooting for all these terrible people? Well, it's probably because, we see those people every day and we understand their struggles. I mean, this has Bruce Willis's character. He's trying to get out of a situation he can't, that he's stuck in. And it's very, that's a very conventional thing. You're like under the thumb of a gangster. But he, unlike other people you see in films, gives it back. Uma, she's a drug addict. They're all, her and Vincent, they're drug addicts. And obviously there's a connection there between the two of them, but there's this understanding where there's no way in hell they can be together. Otherwise Vincent's going to die. And then, of course, Jules is such an interesting character from the standpoint of this guy that is doing this job that he doesn't want to do. Like, he doesn't enjoy it. It's not something he enjoys. It's something to, in a sense, pay the bills, but it's where he's at, and it's what his environment has given him so he has to take advantage of it. And at the end he's very retrospective and he's looking into himself. He's like, no, that was a miracle and I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Like, I have another purpose. I'm gonna walk with the shepherd. I'm gonna be like the shepherd. I'm gonna walk the earth. And Vincent's telling him that doesn't make any goddamn sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
he doesn't buy it. No,
he doesn't buy it.
Care even.
And that's what I think.
Fascinating.
And I think that's when we make a decision in our lives, and people say, oh no, that venture or that, you quit your job to go and start a startup, or you went, you quit that, you quit writing for that place to go create your own website or whatever it is. Why would you do that? Are you crazy? And it's like, no, it seems right. And so,
Yeah.
and then by the end, he's trying to get out of there so that he can see that venture out. You know what I mean? It's very relatable within the confines of this crazy score, soundtrack, which is, awesome. And, ultra violence, which I don't even think the film's that violent. Like,
no,
people need to like,
true.
and the stigmatism that was carried from Cannes to the rest of the award season, and that is carried on since, that he's this style over substance kind of guy, and that he's this grotesque director and he steals from everybody. No, he brings his own things to the table, like great directors do. And yeah, every director borrows from another director. I mean, like Paul Thomas Anderson last year, he did Phantom Thread. That is a clear modern day retelling of Rebecca, which is based off a book. You know what I mean? So everyone takes from everyone and makes something that they think is original. And I mean, I love this film. I kind of like want to know like what your favorite scene of the film is. Like, do you have a favorite scene?
Well, that was all very well said, and it actually reminded me a little bit of this Lady Gaga quote. Lady Gaga's in the news lately from A Star Is Born. But,
don't remind me.
Well, it's happening.
No,
whether you like it or not.
No, Amy Adams needs an Oscar before Lady Gaga. We need to stop this.
We're not saying that she's going to get an Oscar. We're just saying that she's
gonna get this Oscar.
She might get a nomination.
She's gonna get an Oscar. I know it. I have it in my bones.
Okay. Well, regardless, she, when talking about Ryan Murphy when she was working on American Horror Story Hotel, she had this really long rambling quote about how much she loves Ryan Murphy, and it reminds me of when she says, like, he's not afraid to not reference, vomit on it, shit on it. And that's very much like how
that's Quentin
Tarantino is as a director, as a filmmaker. And, we see these kinds of references to movies like 8.5, which is what the dance sequence is kind of more or less modeled after. We see the Ezekiel quote alone, technically not word for word what the Bible says. It is a reference to this Asian film that is Karate Kiba, I believe it's called. And, the whole shining gold box briefcase opening up is kind of sort of a reference to Kiss Me Deadly, even though Tarantino says it's accidental. But, we have all these allusions to the past. And, I think a lot of these references help other people who are watching the movie actually want to seek out classic cinema, which is always a good thing. And that's kind of another thesis statement that he has with a lot of his movies, is to make people go out into the past cinema like he has and appreciate those things. So I appreciate all of that. But having said all of that, as far as classic scenes, the thing is, there are literally so many great scenes in this movie that it's so hard to even narrow down. But oddly enough, in this very violent, blood-filled, profanity-filled movie, for some reason, when I look back on Pulp Fiction, the one image that sticks in my mind is just John Travolta and Uma Thurman in the diner. And just the whole scene, even from their chatting about eventually just trying to enjoy the silence between two people when you're comfortable between the two of you, and eventually her boldness in wanting to go up and dance with him, and he's very reserved, and just the you never can tell song playing, and there's their iconic dance moves. I mean, it's all very classic entertainment cinema that just is shown in that entire sequence that I find so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, even that tracking shot when we're entering Jack Rabbit Slim's, I mean, it's, and he gets lost because, he shoot up like heroin before he got there. So I'm like, what drug was it again?
There are so many.
But yeah, no, I think Sam Jackson steals this movie still to this day. I think I know we can always quote the Ezekiel 25:17, the first one, but I think the one in the diner with Tim Roth is perfect. It's a perfect scene. Anything with Harvey Keitel is fantastic in this film.
The
Like
wolf.
I love him in this film. Like even
Yes.
like him like his interactions with Travolta. It's just like a simple thank you would have sufficed. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's like you don't want to mess with that guy. Like that's the worst guy to mess with.
Exactly.
And it's Harvey Keitel, so he's like the small little guy, but if you see Mean Streets, don't mess with that guy. But no, I think walk-in scene with the gold watch. The gold watch. It has one of like the best, like how we always talk about Christopher Walken. He emphasizes like weird words.
Yeah.
And it's like the best one I think of his entire career was "He be damned." You know what I mean? Like, like it's so great. I every time I watch that scene, I'm like, I do it with him. I think, of course, Marvin getting shot in the head. I think Bruce Willis, like the scenes with Bruce Willis are really good. Like, I think that whole kind of crazy scene, the first time you ever see it with the Gimp is such a memorable scene. Not only for its, just crazy out there idea of what would happen if you entered a pawn shop, I guess, in Los Angeles. But what's really great about that is the style, the soundtrack, how it feels very tonally darker and different than anything you see in the film.
Yeah, it's a real escalation. Yeah,
it's a real escalation, but it the samurai sword plays, of course, like a big. If you know Tarantino, he's a big samurai guy fan. And then of course he does even his own samurai films down the road with Kill Bill, and so that was kind of like a precursor there, and that scene's really cool. But yeah, that stuff with Mia and Vincent, they're talking about the foot massage.
Yes,
is so good, and like you guys gab more than a bunch of old ladies and stuff like that. There's so many great moments in the film, and I think it's a classic. It is a classic. This is what I think of when I think of this year. This is what I think of when I think of the 90s. When I think of the 90s, I think of Pulp Fiction.
It's the defining movie of the 90s.
Yeah,
dare I say. And I actually think the fact that people look at the movie and say that there's not really much of a point to it, I think you have to look at how the movie ends, which kind of goes back to why I think it's perfect the way it does end. Because I think the arc that Jules has through the movie to eventually surviving being shot when he's like, that's like a miracle, it never should have happened, and that he decides to forego his life of crime, and how he eventually wants to be a person in the world and just be a shepherd of sorts. I think that's a really nice redeeming redemption story there, as far as choosing the path of good and evil. And you match that with Vincent, who doesn't really buy into anything that he's saying and just kind of goes about life listlessly just because why not. He gets high, does another hit, doesn't matter if he survived this incredible feat, accidentally shoots someone, doesn't really care that much either. I think those two characters juxtaposed create a really interesting dynamic of how you can live your life, and I just find it all fascinating. And all combined with as well Butch, who also has a kind of a redemption of eventually he gets to a point where he's in that pawn shop where he could very easily just walk away from the whole incident with Marcellus, because why would he help this guy at this point? And he chooses to stick his neck out, and they do it together, and eventually they work out their differences. They're like, I won't say anything if you won't, and go about their business. And that's how he gets to ride off into the sunset at the end. So I think those are all really interesting themes of like good and evil in a way that maybe on a surface level read of the movie you might not pick up on as much, but I think are really fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, even like we talk about Jules and it's, the ending the way it is, you kind of are given that sense of hope. But if you do actually do it chronologically, you do notice that he's not, he gets out. Like Marcellus gives it to him. Like he's not there at the night of the fight when Butch, kills the guy in the ring. He's not there with Vincent. You know what I mean? So you can obviously kind of insinuate that Jules did get out. And that's and I didn't think about that as I've seen it dozens of times until like I got it this time, and I'm like, oh wait, if you think about it in that way, Jules gets out.
Yeah,
he does get to go and have a life away from what then becomes chaos by the end. I can only imagine what's going to happen to Zed and those guys after Marcellus is done with him, go medieval on their ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's just such a good movie. Like there's
at the end of the day,
at the end of the day, like I have that qualm about Tarantino's character, but really beyond that, if I cut that scene out, then I don't have a problem. It's there. I don't care. Like I can get over one scene in a perfect film over, dozens of scenes in an imperfect film.
Absolutely. And the soundtrack is just incredible. I mean, from the Miserillo of the opening credits, obviously, just such a crazy, unexpected choice to just have this like classic surf rock song be your opening credits. And all the classics like Son of a Preacher Man, Let's Get Together, Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon. I mean, just hit after hit is just so classy and iconic. And it gets to the point for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, where when they hear some of these songs, they remember Pulp Fiction. So that's impact right there.
Yeah, no, it is. And it starts that trend that Tarantino does where he gets to give us these great soundtracks, and he, because he doesn't really have scores in his film until Hateful Eight, with, where he gets to work with the guy that he literally took scores from, Morricone, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's the great thing about Tarantino also. We talked about Bruce Willis and Travolta. These guys were in Hollywood jail. He gives so many people second chances. He gives people's careers also too. Thurman, Sam Jackson, Christoph Waltz. These are, people that owe their careers to Quentin. You know what I mean? So. Even somebody like as recently as Jennifer Jason Leigh in Hateful Eight. They owe their resurgence back into the zeitgeist because of him. He's very much this guy that he gets the best out of him. He's an actor's friendly writer or director. They what's better for an actor than to read a bunch of dialogue and get to say cool shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an actor's dream, honestly.
Yeah, and that John Travolta can go and mess up Idina Menzel's name all day he wants, but he's got this film, and that kind of makes up for it. So
I think so. Yeah,
and I love every aspect of this film.
Yeah, it's an absolute classic. Except, that scene. But just recast it with someone else and we'll be fine.
Yeah, but no, because even then the dialogue would not be like it's not.
I know, but that's just like an added layer that makes me very uncomfortable. But this, I mean, it's a classic for a reason. It's so influential. Soundtrack amazing, performances amazing. Such a great cast, even to the minor players. I think they all just add to the film in great ways. And so, it's okay.
It's all right. Yeah, it's all right.
Decent. If you want to watch it, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, you're not missing out on anything. No, just kidding.
So there you have it. That's Pulp Fiction. So when we come back, we will be discussing why Pulp Fiction lost Best Picture at the Oscars to a little movie called Forrest Gump.
But you know the funniest thing about Europe is?
What?
It's the little differences. I mean, they got the same shit over there that they got here, but it's just there, it's a little different.
Example?
All right, well, you can walk into a movie theater in Amsterdam and buy a beer. And I don't mean just like no paper cup, I'm talking about a glass of beer. And in Paris, you can buy a beer in McDonald's. And you know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
They don't call it a quarter pounder with cheese?
Oh, man, they got the metric system. They wouldn't know what the fuck a quarter pounder is.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
What do they call a Big Mac?
Big Mac's a Big Mac, but they call it Le Big Mac.
Le Big Mac. What do they call a Whopper?
I don't know. I didn't go on a Burger King. You know what they put on French fries in Holland instead of ketchup?
What?
Mayonnaise. I seen them do it, man. They fucking drown them in that shit.
Yeah. We should have shotguns with this kind of deal.
Help me up there.
3 or 4.
That's counting our guy?
Not sure.
So that means it could be up to 5 guys up there?
It's possible.
We should have fucking shotguns.
And we're back. So now we are going to talk about why Pulp Fiction lost Best Picture to Forrest Gump. First of all, Pulp Fiction was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director for Quentin Tarantino, Best Actor for John Travolta, Best Supporting Actor for Samuel L. Jackson, Best Supporting Actress for Uma Thurman, Best Original Screenplay for Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary, and Best Film Editing. And it walked away with just one of those, Best Original Screenplay. So before the Oscars, Pulp Fiction didn't really win anything major as far as industry awards. Obviously, it had won the Palme d'Or, as we discussed. It won a lot of critics' prizes. It won in Los Angeles, National Board of Review, National Society of Film Critics, Boston, Dallas, all these things. It was like the critics' favorite of the year, much like LA Confidential in certain ways. But Forrest Gump very much dominated the conversation, not only in the Oscar race, but in the film year in general. It walked away with the Golden Globe, it walked away with PGA, DGA, and the WGA for Adapted. And I will just note that the reason that Quentin Tarantino did not win the WGA is because he is not in the Writers Guild.
No, he is not.
Yeah, because if he had been, it's very clear it probably would have won the WGA, which actually went to 4 Weddings and a Funeral, another Best Picture nominee. So let's talk about this. Forrest Gump pretty much dominates the race. It is now the #1 movie of 1994, and it's just one of these years where I think one movie completely overshadows everything else. It became a cultural phenomenon. It launched a restaurant chain, for God's sake. And it had everyone's favorite leading man, basically, Tom Hanks, in another Oscar-winning performance going back to back. And so a lot of factors here. I think the answer is clear, but why do you think Pulp Fiction did not ultimately win Best Picture here?
Here it goes, Kevin. Because Pulp Fiction was the most popular film of that year.
You mean Forrest Gump?
Or I'm sorry, yeah. I wish it was. No,
yeah. Exactly.
Forrest Gump is the most popular film of that year.
Yeah.
At the time. Like, it is a phenomenon. Like, it is not a film that ages well, though. It is a terrible film to win Best Picture from this year.
Ooh, terrible film. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is cliched as any Best Picture film of all time. It is a film that is basically a restaurant piece of apple pie. It's got your American soundtrack that you literally hear at like 2 a.m. when they're trying to sell you the 40 discs on television.
Oh, yeah.
It's got this character that is played very well by Tom Hanks, going through every event in a 30-year, 40-year history. I mean, he even goes, his wife, the love of his life, even goes through the AIDS crisis. And it's done in such a weird, not even mentioning kind of what she has. Like, you gotta go look, you gotta go look it up, to even know what she has.
Yeah. I think it's kind of
disgusting.
It's kind of clear how, what they're talking about ultimately, but yeah, go on.
It's disgusting the way they do it. Like, it's not really, it's gross.
Yeah.
And it feels like, look, Steven Spielberg told Tarantino, I read one night at a party, that you made a great film, kid. Like, there's no question. Like, your movie's out there and it's great and it's all you. But it's Bob's year. Bob Zemeckis is like this mecca. You know what I mean? Like,
it's time, God
like
damn
he's
it.
like we weren't all sitting around the room in 1994. Me being 2 years old at the time, even I probably would tell you, I'm like, yeah, Bob Zemeckis totally deserves an Oscar, because he doesn't deserve one. He's not a great like one of these Mount Rushmore directors like Scorsese, who at the time did not have an Oscar. who took another decade and a half to get one.
I know.
You know what I mean? And so this idea of that permeates a lot through the Oscars, which is, he's young enough and he's made something here that he could probably make something like this again.
Yeah.
Therefore, we can give you kind of like we'll give you a little token here, but we're not going to give you the whole prize.
Yep. Here's original screenplay.
Here's original screenplay. None of your people in there. Yeah, it's the best you're gonna get. And so that's what happened with this film. Now, it's good to note that both of these films are very successful at the box office.
Mm-hmm. Pulp Fiction's number 10. So.
Yeah, Pulp Fiction's number 10 for being that film and being number 10 that year in a year that has so many hits. To be number 10 is impressive.
Oh,
very impressive. Forrest Gump, while long. It's
a bit of an endurance test, yep. Mm-hmm.
It does. I know screeners were the next year, but if there were screeners, this would have played well either way. Like I think it would have played beautifully because it's easy to watch. Yeah. Do I want to watch a film about drug dealers and a rape scene and violence, or do I want to watch a film where this guy basically goes through Nam and all these things in the funniest of ways? You know what I mean? It's like so cute. You know what I mean? Like, no. No, I don't want to do that because I rather think than have my brain plugged off and like have a history lesson that's like watered down.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why it won, because it was accessible. You know what I mean? It played the game. And back then you had to play the game a little bit more than this Academy. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the thing about Pulp Fiction is it reminds me a lot of Get Out. It was the movie of the year. It was this film that everybody at the time, I know everyone was talking about it being nominated for stuff, but it wasn't really going to be in this play for Best Picture, right? Because everyone kept saying, well, that movie's just too out there.
They're never going to go for that.
They're never going to go for that shit. And just like this past year, like, oh, that movie came out in February. There's no way Jordan Peele and them will get nominated. You know what I mean? And it still permeates to today.
Absolutely.
But art carries. Mm-hmm. And if you get enough votes, you get to go up there on that night. And it got the right awards to get nominated for if you want to win Best Picture. I think cinematography or like maybe like costume design or like sound editing or mixing, it could have got in there for some of their stuff. But the editing, the director, the picture, the writer, the acting, that was perfect for it. But it wasn't going anywhere because, Tom Hanks had Philadelphia the year before and people went through that ride. You know what I mean? And that's a hard movie to watch.
Right, exactly.
So juxtaposes it the next year, he gives him this candy on a platter. And also too, like, Pulp Fiction had to fight the other three films in this race too. Like, it wasn't just, obviously the two main dogs are Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
But at that time too, Four Weddings and a Funeral was a surprise smash hit.
Yes. That is not remembered as much, I think, because people see, it must have been also The Shawshank Redemption. But if you look at it through the lens of 1994, Shawshank Redemption never had a chance, honestly. No. It really didn't. For one, which was very important in the 90s, it kind of bombed at the box office. It only made like $27 million. That kind of a movie in the 90s never really had a chance.
That's crazy, though. It's crazy because if you see that film, I would say it's a more inspirational story than Forrest Gump.
Oh, of course it is.
And so how the hell it didn't get in there?
It just
crazy.
Somehow didn't permeate the consciousness in the same way.
Yeah, which is weird. I don't know how. I didn't see the trailer how they marketed it, but I'm sure. And it came out really late in the year. I remember that. Yeah. It came out really late in the year, so it was kind of like nobody really got to talk about that twist. You know what I mean? It was one of those, just go see it. I can't talk about it. And like back then, word of mouth was so huge. You know what I mean? Word of mouth spread like a virus around the country because we didn't have social media.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if Ebert and wasn't talking about it, then you had to go and venture out and get it yourself. And so, yeah, Shawshank, which is evidently the most popular film on IMDb of all time,
Correct. Yes.
That came from this year.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why. It's because it's built up this following, and it is a classic because of what it didn't do within its year, which was build an audience.
Yeah.
But there's a film also that was nominated, and it's the fifth one that we haven't mentioned. It's Quiz Show.
Yeah.
And I gotta say this about this year, first off, before I talk about Quiz Show. This is the strongest of 5 nominees I can ever remember. All 5 of these films I really like.
Yeah.
And I actually think
a great lineup, honestly.
And I actually think Quiz Show might be, it's between this and A River Runs Through It, might be the best directed film by Robert Redford.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably say it's this. If you gave me a glass of wine or a beer or something, I probably would say this more if I had to tilt the other way, because I love this film. And I only recently saw it like 2 years ago. And it is very entertaining.
It's so good.
It's so good. Totoro's so good. Fiennes is fantastic.
Oh yeah.
It's the sense of like corruption at the highest level. Gee, I wonder if that's timely. Something being rigged. I'm sure that's timely. You know what I mean? So I think it's a really good film. And so Pulp Fiction had to fight off these other ones too that had, Shawshank's like a small indie darling, and then of course, Redford has his following, and then Four Weddings and a Funeral is a surprise hit and has its following.
Sleeper hit. It won the BAFTA.
Yeah.
It was technically after the Oscars, but still it won the BAFTA.
But the same people vote for it.
Loved it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, it had to fight those as well as fight its narrative.
Yeah.
And it had to really also fight Quentin, because, Quentin is his own worst enemy. You know what I mean?
Very true.
And also too, Weinstein's never really, as much as they have been, and this is getting into him, is that as much as they have pushed other films, they've never really pushed Tarantino's films for Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
He has to do it himself, really. Like, this film is his most nominated film, I think. I think it's pretty close, if not Django Unchained's right up there.
Yeah.
And both of those films, what had to happen? They were very controversial films. They were very polarizing films. They have scenes of graphic violence and just moments that make you extremely uncomfortable as an audience. And what had to happen? They had to build up a campaign from word of mouth.
Yeah.
And they had to build up a campaign to define the odds. And back, in that year, they had to fight off 9 films for Django Unchained. And he didn't even get nominated for director, or even like Inglourious Basterds, he does get nominated for director, but he's such an afterthought to Avatar and The Hurt Locker.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is devastating.
But I do think he was a close third.
Very much.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he ever gets the due of that Weinstein campaign and going around town and shoving shit in people's face until you just vote for it.
Yeah.
They never did that for him. And I hope Sony, maybe, I don't know if they're going to be able to, because his next film is just going to be a humdinger.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how you're going to market that film.
I'm already sensing all of the think pieces.
Exactly.
Which are already being written anyway.
They're already being written anyway. But I think he's going to try to, I think he's going to do like 70s kind of Butch and Sundance with DiCaprio and Pitt.
Yeah.
And kind of play it off like that. And I think it's going to have that backdrop. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see. But yeah, Forrest Gump, that movie is just so blah. It's so blah.
Yeah, I just actually rewatched it for the first time in quite a while, because I am not a fan of the movie, admittedly. It's one of these situations where like my family and other friends are like, Forrest Gump, best movie of all time.
Oh god.
Like Ray Romano in The Big Sick. Being like, best friggin' movie ever. But it's just, I think, honestly, Forrest Gump is just catnip for just baby boomers, honestly.
Oh, yes.
Because
I totally agree.
It evokes Vietnam and all the big moments from that era. It has all the classic music, very on-the-nose music at that. Like, if you're going to San Francisco when they're going to San Francisco. Do we need that? Do we?
Running on empty when he's running.
Yes, multiple songs about running. Like, we get it. Okay, we don't need to underscore every single thing with exactly what's happening.
Like, it's so cliched. It's so bad. Like,
and also, I think I'm kind of, when I look at it, it really does read like very much a conservative wet dream.
Yeah, it does.
Like, the idea of this guy who just doesn't make a fuss, who just follows orders, does what anyone tells him. Also, he's a white guy, and he just, gets into war, becomes this war hero, stumbles into success, never questions anything, has zero critical thinking skills, and he meets presidents. He becomes a nationwide hero. Meanwhile, this is what I was most offended by on rewatching it. Everything that happens to Jenny is horrific.
Yes.
I mean, and she is presented as this person who is like this typical, I guess, Vietnam hippie protester characteristic, But first of all, I think Robin Wright provides a lot of depth to the role that is not often recognized, and she was not recognized by the Academy, but I think she has a very difficult role to work with and manages to imbue it with a lot of pathos. But as far as the character written on the page, I mean, she's just cliche after cliche, and she gets into the worst situations more or less because she is a critical thinker and questions everything, rightfully questioning everything. And then at the end, she gets AIDS and dies.
And he's got to like take care of his kid.
Yeah.
Which, in what world would a guy with handicap like that get full custody without somebody in the legal system being like, yeah, maybe that's not the best thing because he thinks life is a box of chocolates. You know what I mean? Like, and stuff like that. Like, also too, like, what's weird is like a couple of years before this film, like Sally Fields and Tom Hanks were like love interests in a film, and then they play like mother and son. It's like kind of creepy. Like, I'm not gonna lie. And that's another thing too, where
Hollywood thing.
where like the woman has to play like basically like twice her age at the time or something like that, and yet the guy can play like the young man. That's bullshit. And then Jenny is like, what if we just brought in a bunch of liberal stereotypes that conservatives sit around while they're drinking brandy, and made her into a character, but yet they're gonna love each other because opposites attract. And it's just like, no, that's a terrible thing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And also, like, I think Gary Sinise is pretty good in this film, but he plays like that stereotypical like guy that I've seen some things from war, and it's like none of this film ages well. It doesn't age well like the other four nominees in this. Like, Four Weddings and a Funeral is a perfect film. Like, we talk about Pulp Fiction, that is a perfect representation of what I love about romantic comedies. Like, and
great for its genre. Absolutely.
It's great. And then like Quiz Show is a great meditation on corruption and uncovering the truth. Like, that's perfect. Like, it's not leaning any way. It's just saying this is the truth.
Information. Yeah,
exactly. Shawshank is the story about friendship and survival. That is, I mean, it's I saw it a couple of weeks ago, like the last 30 minutes, because like AMC basically like owns that movie on television. And it still gets me. Like, I know that's cliche out there to say, like, because of course, Shawshank gets you, but like anytime Morgan Freeman, of course, is narrating, and at that end where he's like, I just hope the water is as beautiful as I remember it, and I just hope I get to see my friend. You're just like, that film earned it. That film earns that relationship. Pulp Fiction earns all of its bag, its greatness that we talked about. Forrest Gump doesn't earn a damn thing other than Best Picture and Best Actor and Best Director, and that's where I think people's frustration gets with this Academy at times, is its disconnect. Like, sure, it made a bunch of money and the people at the time see it, but like, that's what happened with American Sniper. Like American Sniper made a
Mhm.
bunch of money, and it's pandering to an audience, of course, like middle America, that's going to go out and see something like this. It
Yes.
doesn't mean that it deserves Best Picture, because Best Picture should represent its time, and the
Mhm.
other films do that better. And Forrest Gump represents the past, and
Very much so.
ain't it great? And it's
Yep.
like, no, the present is what we need to talk about, like
Mhm.
not look to the past for answers, because if we look to the past for our answers, we're going to repeat that same shit. And
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
it's devastating. It's devastating that film won. But I mean,
Yeah.
it never had a shot, and that sucks.
I know. Nothing else did. Nothing else had a shot. Like
It's like Titanic.
exactly. Yeah.
You brought up the LA Confidential thing when comparing Pulp Fiction. Once Titanic was released, we could have
Game
just
over.
we don't have to watch, we
Yeah.
don't have to watch the ceremony. We don't have to watch David Letterman. We can just go home. It's no big deal.
Yeah. Going to Twitter, there were a few people asking questions about this year, especially Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction, of course. Jeffrey Kerr asked, what do you think of Forrest Gump's 72% critical rating on Rotten Tomatoes? That's pretty low for a Best Picture winner. I agree, and I think it should be lower. Next question.
No, I think that well, obviously, I think that if these films came out this year, Pulp Fiction would win. It would mostly win. I think also Shawshank would have a big following. That film would have a huge momentum.
Of course, yeah.
I
also think Quiz Show.
I think Quiz, yeah.
There's a narrative there.
Like what I just said, the truth, right? The angle. I think that would be really good. Yeah, I think that those three would be your front runner.
Yeah,
and I think Forrest Gump would be like Darkest Hour. It gets in there, and you're just kind of like,
and
you're kind of just like, okay, we're just giving this to the actor, and because of the system, it works. But 72% is low. Like that's
low.
That's almost rotten.
Yeah.
Like I know like rotten is like 59% and below, right?
Yep,
no, 69% and below to me is like an F. Like that's when you know we're at C- range with that. All right. That's your Best Picture winner. So think about that. Like that's bad. So no. That's a big water stain on that movie.
Yeah. And also, Kyle Flyberg asked, should Pulp Fiction have walked away with more than one Oscar? I think so, and it should have won Best Picture. Yes, I agree. It should have won Best Picture, and it should have walked away with film editing, at least. And I am actually curious about if you think any of the performances deserve to win.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so first of all, film editing. I just wanted to see that real quick. And
Forrest Gump won.
Yeah, spoiler
alert.
Spoiler alert.
What else?
You look at the 4 other nominees in that film, in that category. It was Hoop Dreams, which is the great documentary from that year.
So and that's also a very inspired nomination, by the way.
That is a great nomination. That's something like I hope they do this year with like Won't You Be My Neighbor? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And then Pulp Fiction and Shawshank, which has really good editing, and then Speed, which is a very underrated film in terms of its editing. That movie has to have good editing, otherwise it sucks. I think Sally definitely deserved it. Sally Menken, who the deceased editor of Quentin Tarantino's films, from the beginning all the way until Inglourious Bastards. I think she deserved it hand over fist. I mean, that editing is so good.
It's literally like key to why the movie is great, I think. Even if you go away from the sort of non-chronological thing, I mean, just the way it's all put together and cut together with the dialogue, and
it's not easy. It's not easy. But you have to factor in that nonlinear structure, and editing causes that film to either work or not work.
Exactly.
Knocks it out of the park, and it's fantastic. I think Travolta never had a shot in here.
Obviously not against Tom Hanks.
I mean, we can say, let me just say this though. Okay, we talk about category fraud a lot when we talk about the Oscars.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. I was going to bring this up. Yep.
Morgan Freeman. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I love Morgan Freeman. He's great in the film. Okay. It is absolutely a crime that Tim Robbins didn't get nominated for Best Actor, and that Morgan Freeman is not a supporting actor. That's Tim Robbins' movie. Like, it's the story. It's Andy's story.
Literally.
For the love of God, it's Andy's story. Like, I don't understand it at all. And Morgan never had a shot. Like, that's that Paul Newman nomination is it's Paul Newman. I get it.
Yeah.
But like nobody had a shot to beat Hanks. I mean, like
No.
Hanks was like the guy. Nigel Hawthorne for The Madness of King George. Like, yeah, like another guy playing a royal. Congratulations. Diane Wiest winning over Uma Thurman. I think that's a pretty good win.
Yeah, I was going to say, having seen Bullets Over Broadway, I think that's a deserved win, to be honest.
I haven't seen it in a while, and I was trying to find it, but you can't find it anywhere. Like, you can't stream it anywhere.
That seems to be a problem with a lot of Woody Allen movies.
And it's going to be about like his next film where you're not going to be able to see that one either. But
it's for different reasons. Yes. But yeah.
Yes.
Similar reasons. But,
yeah. But no, it's actually a really good performance by Diane Wiest. And I don't think Uma has like, I think she has enough to get nominated, but I don't think she has like a scene.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, I love Martin Landau to death. Like, he's great. Okay. And he's really good as Bela Lugosi.
Yep.
But there is no damn way he is better than Samuel L. Jackson. Like, no way. He like Landau is probably third in where I would rank these actors, because you had Landau, Jackson, Palminteri for Bullets Over Broadway, Paul Scofield for Quiz Show, and Sinise.
Right.
And I would give this to Jackson in a heartbeat. But I'd also consider Paul Scofield. I think he's really good in Quiz Show.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of hasn't like been anywhere since, like, it feels like. Of course, because he's a very older actor. And he passed away. But after like that film, he's such a good character actor. Like, he didn't get like a juicy role, for years after that, you know what I mean? And he retired, and it looks like his last film was like in 1999. So he was really good, and he got a lot of, of course he got BAFTA nominated and a bunch of critics nominations, but he's very good in that film. And but yeah, obviously I would give it to Sam Jackson and
Josh
director. Obviously, we could.
Yeah, for sure. And Josh Parham actually asked Martin Landau versus Samuel L. Jackson, who is your preference? You say Samuel L. Jackson. I honestly think it's a little bit closer for me, but I would still go with Samuel L. Jackson. Because Martin Landau is so good, so soulful, and full of depth as Bela Lugosi and Ed Wood. But
probably Tim Burton's best film.
I absolutely agree. And we will get to that later.
Okay. Spoiler alert. But also, like, too, like, that's Sam Jackson's only ever nomination.
Mm-hmm.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
Really sad that he hasn't been like in consideration for anything since.
It's really tragic. Yeah.
Especially like he's really good in like another Tarantino film, Django Unchained. And
I would have nominated him. Absolutely.
And in that year of Oscar So White, I was sitting there, I'm like, why isn't Samuel Jackson be nominated for Hateful Eight?
Yeah.
He's really good in that movie. So, yeah. And
Samuel L. Jackson and Tarantino are just such a winning combination for me that I love whenever they collaborate.
Yeah. I'm kind of sad that I don't think he's going to be in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, not from what we've seen. But
even
though everyone in Hollywood is going to be in it.
Well, actually, let's rephrase that. Every white person in Hollywood seems to be in this film.
That is very true. That's a very good point. But as far as other questions about this particular race, and speaking of acting categories, we had a few questions about Best Actress. This is a category where nobody from a Best Picture nominee is nominated.
It's weird.
So, yeah, we have Jessica Lange winning her second Oscar this year for Blue Sky, which is a very, 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 very small movie that was made like 3 years previously and put on the shelf. And then they were like, well, yeah, let's release it, see what happens. And here we go. Jessica Lange wins her lead Oscar. So that is cool. I have not seen it. I don't know where to see it. And sad. I mean, because I love Jessica Lange. She's incredible. But a lot of people say they love her in the role, so I'll have to take their word for it. But another question here was from Pete Chorba, who asked basically, why did she win? Yeah, Mark Lamb asked who we think was number 2 in this race. There has been some arguments that it might have actually been Jodie Foster,
Oh God.
and that would have been her third Oscar in like 6 years.
Yeah.
And that would have been for Nell, which is a very polarizing movie, very polarizing performance. But I don't know if they would have gone with her a third time, to be honest, in so many years. I would almost gravitate towards saying Susan Sarandon for The Client, because there was some buzz kind of building for her being overdue in much the same way as people like Amy Adams are today. So
Yeah.
that's a possibility. Maybe Winona Ryder, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't see Foster winning it. I mean, she won for The Accused, and even people were like, should she really have won for The Accused? Because like everyone thought it was going to go to Glenn Close, and then you know, for Dangerous Liaisons, I believe that was that year, which is a fantastic performance by Glenn Close. And then of course she wins for Silence of the Lambs, which is kind of like, come on, there's no way that she wasn't going to win that Oscar for Silence of the Lambs. That performance is so good.
Absolutely.
Nell is one of those films that I always think about with like Tropic Thunder. We're making, you know, like the Simple Jack kind of thing, or like it is a film about somebody with a disability. So we've got to nominate somebody who's playing that role. And Jodie Foster's that big actress or that big actor at the time. So of course she's going to play that role. And to me, like the film is very uneven, and I'm not a big fan of it. I think her performance is really good. Makes sense that she was Oscar nominated, because she was like the Amy Adams, or like she was like the Meryl Streep of her time, of like her generation, or Amy Adams of her generation, where she's just going to get nominated for everything she puts on screen. But I actually think it would have been probably like Susan Sarandon. I know she won for Dead Man Walking the next year.
Yeah. Just talked about it last week. So
yeah. But I think that her performance as The Client's really good in a film that's it's really tough to say if that's the best Gresham adaptation. I think A Time to Kill is really good, with a really good performance from Samuel L. Jackson. But no, I think she's really good in the film. I don't think Winona Ryder was going to be a front runner at all for Little Women. Miranda Richardson, I have not seen.
Tom and Viv, I haven't seen. So
I haven't seen that film, and I have not seen Jessica Lange's performance. But it's also like Jessica Lange's a very respected actress. She is one of those, like, she's nominated for like anything that Ryan Murphy does, and of course she wins because she just has this reputation of being this really good actress, and she really is.
Yeah.
And so of course she beats her feud co-star in the past, and then beats her in the present, and then beats her in the show, you know what I mean? It's all, all good things for Jessica Lange, I guess. But Susan Sarandon, she got her Oscar the next year, so I think she's fine.
She's fine. Yeah. And it is kind of funny how like Jessica Lange wins this year and then Susan Sarandon wins the next year, just like looking back, because obviously they were among each other at the time. Who knew that 20 years later they would be playing sparring people in old Hollywood who were also often nominated for Oscars. So,
and a whole
life works.
And a whole episode dedicated to that night at the Oscars, which is the most craziest night.
So good. I liked Feud. Anyway, regardless, we're off track. So let me see if there's anything else. I think that's pretty much covers that aspect of things. But I definitely would have given Samuel L. Jackson the win here, even though Martin Landau was probably overdue, obviously. But it's just, when you look back on it, that's just one of those iconic performances that will always be remembered in film history. So I cannot go against that at all.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of how I feel about like Alan Arkin beating Eddie Murphy. Like, I don't think that win moves, like, it ages well as much as like I guess the Landau performance, because he is very standout in that film. So
there you go. Yeah. For me, I wanted to get into a few other the Best Picture nominees that I didn't necessarily comment on. I do love The Shawshank Redemption. We covered that. But Four Weddings and a Funeral is a really delightful little movie that is very... this is another actually really great screenplay. Really tight, great dialogue, and really well structured. Always keeps your attention. And Hugh Grant, I mean, that is a great Hugh Grant performance. It's great.
It's probably his best performance.
Yeah.
On
And the
screen.
fact, he wins a Golden Globe for comedy musical. He wins at BAFTA. And so for him not to even get an Oscar nomination, it's kind of like, that's interesting. And he still has not received an Oscar nomination all these years later.
He will this year.
Even when he got close for Florence Foster Jenkins.
He will this year, though. I really hope so. If you guys don't know, he was in Paddington 2, and he's that in sequence during the credits alone deserves an Oscar nomination. He's so good in that movie. He's so good.
He is so delightful in that movie.
Yes, he is.
And I mean, I don't know if the chemistry between him and Andy McDowell is all that strong, but I think it's good for what it is, and they do sell it. And the supporting cast is really good. Lots of great moments, especially the funeral scene in that is really, really surprisingly powerful. And Kristen Scott Thomas is great. So it's just a great cast. And I hope that more people will check it out. I do know that there is a TV show being made by Mindy Kaling.
Really?
That is, she's doing an anthology series called Four Weddings and a Funeral. That's kind of based around the concept loosely. So that'll be exciting to see. And quiz show, like I said, really, really great. And I do like that because I tweeted about this when I watched it earlier this week. But I just love the fact that this movie, essentially the conflict of it is the tension of basically lying about not knowing a Best Picture winner.
Yeah, that's pretty
very relatable.
Very inside baseball right there. Very much.
Yeah, so that's just really fun. And John Turturro is like really good in the movie, and so is Ralph Fiennes. And I wish either of those two guys were nominated, especially John Turturro. But here we are.
Yeah, so, Ralph Fiennes, another actor that mysteriously doesn't have an Oscar.
Yes, very odd.
Like Tommy Lee Jones has his Oscar at his house. Like that's
we'll be talking Schindler's List next week, but that's a crime. What happened there?
Exactly.
Yeah. To kind of lead us into the next segment, Drew Schwanier Ray asked, 1994 is often seen as a watershed year in cinema. Do you think that's reflected in the breadth of the nominees, not just Best Picture?
Yeah, it's very complimentary to a lot of films, these nominations. I think, first of all, it's a very popular year. There's that word again, popular. I know that we don't want to talk about it, but it's a very popular year. And this is like, with this category, this is the kind of one of those years where they're like hoping to get back to, where like all the Best Picture nominees are pretty much, they've got a great, bunch of people behind them. And then there's like, 5, 6, 7, 8 films that get like $100 million or whatever that are like close in the Oscar nominations and around award season. So yeah, I think like Pulp Fiction, like I said, the 5 nominees are really good, but then you have stuff like, Lion King, for example, an animated film right in the middle of Disney's Renaissance. They are making the cash machine happen again, and it gets a bunch of nominations. There's Legends of the Falls. That is a very popular film, capitalizing on, that Brad Pitt kind of era of him, being the leading man, and that's really good.
Yeah, and it wins Best Cinematography, so which is pretty significant.
So deserves it. You have like Speed and True Lies get a bunch of nominations in the tech categories. You have like Interview for a Vampire there as well. I mean, like these are titles that we all know at this day and age, but even back then, I mean, like these were movies that everybody went to go see at the theaters. And this is a good crop of nominees, just not from the Best Picture ones themselves, but when you really get into it, no, I agree. Like the films that were nominated in the tech categories are really solid here.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And it is very representative of the year. I think there's not as many major snubs that people get upset about. There's always going to be those, but I think they did a pretty solid job of kind of covering a lot of different bases here. with one interesting exception that I'll get into on the should have been a contender side of things. But just to wrap up this discussion, Sebastian Gronbach tweeted about the host of this year's Oscars, David Letterman. He said, "Is David Letterman's Uma Oprah joke actually good? Because it's one of the few opening bits from any Oscar monologue that's still brought up." What's your take on the David Letterman hosting gig here?
Well, it was in one of those years, as you remember, that Crystal took a break. Like, Billy, starting in the 90s, was the guy that ran the Oscars. Like, you know, and even in the 2000s, and of course, his last one was 2011. Or no, 2011. I think, with the artist.
With the artist,
So, I have to say, like, Billy Crystal him and Bob Hope are the two greatest Oscar hosts of all time. And like, I would
also put in Whoopi Goldberg personally.
Whoopi's really good too. Like, it was, if Crystal wasn't doing it, then it was Whoopi.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I actually think the best opening bit that he ever did was in 2004 for Mystic River with Clint Eastwood. Those 5 songs were his most clear, because like, that was the thing about Billy Crystal. He would do that song thing. Only like 3 of the 5 would work. You know what I mean? And Whoopi was actually like really good. She like knew how to like make a show or spectacle of it. Kind of like how Ellen does. Like, I think maybe they should have ladies do the Oscars more, because like, they get how to make it a show.
Oh yeah.
That's why, you know, they still haven't announced who's going to do this year. And I'm saying, take a dump load of money over to Amy Poehler and Tina Fey's place, because they deserve to host the Oscars.
I completely agree. Yeah.
But Letterman reminds me a lot of like Jon Stewart.
Yes.
And that they are great in their own avenues, but they don't necessarily work here. Now, Stewart got a second chance, and I think his second chance was better than his first. But Letterman's opening monologue I watched recently, it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's not bad. And the Uma Oprah joke is not bad. It's done something like in most comedy, where there's a thread that you bring it back to, and it's a transition, you know what I mean? And you know, Chris Rock's notorious for using it in his stand-up. And obviously he did a pretty bang up job in his 2 ones as well. Stand-up comedians are hard to do the Oscars. You know what I mean? Usually entertainers work better. They just do. And so he was kind of on a curve there, but for the most part, that joke, I know that it wasn't Oprah and him have like this huge feud. So it's it's no secret. And then of course, Uma Thurman didn't like it, but of course they're not going to like it, because the joke's about them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it played well in the room, and I think it ages fine. But I mean, it also was like that thing of like, everybody wanted Billy, and they got stuck with Letterman for years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I just feel like, I mean, the press at the time was very critical of David Letterman. There's a reason that they're just like, well, we're never making this mistake again, basically, after this. But as far as the joke itself, I think I kind of just like it in like an ironic way, because it's just so kind of dumb and stupid wordplay. It's fine, you know.
Yeah, it would be like if Conan O'Brien did the Oscars this year. He's going to do something stupid like that, and you just got to take it. But if you listen to his other jokes in it, they're actually really good.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just think also too, like, the crowd they weren't going to be on his side anyway. Like, people didn't like Dave. It's
just a different vibe, I think.
Yeah. He's notoriously a bad interviewer. Like, he's great. Like, comedians love him because like, he just grills the shit out of people, but like, stars hate him. So it's not surprising.
Yeah. So go back and watch that if you haven't. But let's move on to our should have been a contender segment. So these are other movies that were nominated for Oscars, or movies completely ignored by the Oscars that we still like anyway. So Ryan, give it to me.
Well, I think, see, like this year, I saw your tweet like about how troubling this year is, because there's so many nominees that have questionable paths as of now, you know what I mean, in the current moment. And we mentioned him, Woody Allen for Bullets Over Broadway.
Yeah.
That movie is one of his finer films over the last couple of decades.
Agreed.
And
Yes.
I'm kind of surprised because that feels like a film Hollywood would go for if we were in an expanded race. And he got the director and he got screenplay and acting nominations and a bunch of other techs. So it was kind of surprising that he didn't pull out Best Picture nomination as well.
To me, that is a big surprise. I mean, this film gets 7 nominations and not Best Picture. This is tied for his most amount of nominations for a movie with Hannah and her sisters with 7. So I don't know what really happened here. I don't know what was 5th, to be honest. I mean, I know 4 Weddings and a Funeral only got the other Best Original Screenplay nomination. It only gets 2. But at the same time, there was so much love for it that I don't know. Like, Quisho or Shawshank, who knows?
I think it was probably 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Quisho has Redford.
Yeah.
Shawshank has it had strong reactions to people that saw it. So when
but people it didn't get into director.
That's true. It didn't get into director, which kind of is. Yeah. It's kind of surprising that it didn't. So also Woody has this thing where he gets in certain places and he just doesn't get in others. I mean, he's a weird cat. He doesn't do the awards prancing around, and I generally think that anybody pushing their film ahead of his, he tries to just do it on the merit of the film, which is like the merit of the guy doesn't deserve the merit and benefit of the doubt. And so those films, of course, we're going to push over him because he wasn't out there. And you got to play a little bit of the game with these guys. Like these old guys like to be fine, wined and dined.
They like to be wooed. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they like to be wooed. And so I was really happy to see Kozlowski get in here. I think Red, his 3 Colors trilogy is fantastic. And he got so overlooked for Blue, which is the best, I think, film out of the 3. But he also has Red and White that come out within this same year. Red, I think, if it's an expanded nominations, I think this pulls out a Best Picture nomination.
Possibly. I think screenplay as well. So
it gets screenplay. It gets director.
Right.
I mean, which is huge. I think he. I think it's a perfect trilogy. It's really well shot. And he's one of those directors that it was a lifetime kind of achievement thing. It was towards the end of his career. I think it totally gets in. It was critically praised. I like White a little bit more than Red, and I like Blue the most. But Red is still a very good film, and so I think he would have got in. I think Legends of the Falls, I mentioned it earlier. I think that film, while not critically received well, it's one of those films like it's going to get in there because it has so many below the line nominations. And I know people can take it or leave the performance, but if it's like in this year, I think Anthony Hopkins gets nominated for his performance. Like that is a really ballsy performance. And I really like that one. And I like the film. I think it got so like looked over as like this romantic kind of epic, if it were. And I think there's more to that film than meets the eye. Obviously The Lion King would be in there. It's one of Disney's best films they've ever made. And then Ed Wood is Tim Burton's best film. I think it's this and Big Fish are my favorite films from him. And it's when they are not about crazy, batshit insane people.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's no coincidence that those might be your favorite.
It's when he just strips it down and he's more human about it. You know what I mean? And I wish he would do stuff like that other than like Dark Shadows and freaking Dumbo movies. It gets only the Martin Landau nomination, and that's kind of sad because
makeup.
Oh yeah, and makeup, of course,
which it also won, by the way.
Yes, and I think it's 2 wins. I mean, like it should have been in the screenplay kind of mix. I think
absolutely, I agree.
And his direction, it's very old school. It's a very old school film, and so I mean, those are some. I mean, obviously, Speed, True Lies, those are big films. I would have loved to see something like Hudsucker Proxy, which is one of my favorite Coen brother films that year get in there. I would have loved to see Leon the Professional. It's such a cool movie. It's so different. Bassan's best probably. And a really great performance from Oldman and of course Natalie Portman. Yeah. And then like I would have given like, I know like they don't do this a lot. I know they kind of did like a Golden Globe for when Robin Williams did The Genie or something, but like somebody needed to give like Jim Carrey a special honorary Oscar for that year, because his dedication in those 3 performances in Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, and Ace Ventura, that is like the best stretch of comedy I think anyone has ever had in a year. 3 polar opposite kind of performances in those films. And I mean, he's of course an actor that's gone on to do much more, but like this is the year that made him. And I was very happy to kind of go back and realize, oh yeah, that was the year he did that. And I would have loved also like a screenplay nomination for Kevin Smith for Clerks. I think that one was kind of like, I'm surprised, because I think like nowadays, like, comedies get those, like The Big Sick last year, you know what I mean? Or like when Yorgos Lanthimos got in there for The Lobster, or when McDonough got in there for In Bruges, like comedies like that are on small micro budgets. They get in that category, and that's the strongest thing about that film.
Yeah, like you outlined there, incredible year of film. You definitely had a lot of the movies that I had on my list. Lion King especially is my favorite Disney animated movie, and it's like a lot of people's favorite animated movies, so that's not an original thought, but the fact remains that it's just a perfect formula of obviously the classic Shakespearean tale, and the music is so epic.
Do you think Can You Feel the Love Tonight deserved the Oscar, or Hakuna Matata or Circle of Life deserved it more?
I'm going to say that Circle of Life probably deserved it more. Yeah. Because I think that is one of my favorite openings to any movie that perfectly captures the sensibility of the film itself and really sucks you right in. And it's just this such grand song, so epic. And I probably would have gone with that. But Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Can't go wrong with that. I think it's beautiful. The melody's beautiful. Sometimes it makes me cry. And Hakuna Matata is really great too. It's kind of obviously the goofier song of the 3, but still incredibly catchy. But I do think Circle of Life probably deserved it ultimately. And Cody Derricks actually asked an interesting question, which is, how close do you think Lion King was to a Best Picture nomination? Not trying to slam it, but it seems strange that 4 Weddings and a Funeral got in over it.
Everybody dogging on 4 Weddings and a Funeral, huh? Go back and watch that movie. It's really good.
It is.
I don't think it was getting nominated for Best Picture. The thing about like Lion King, I think it has a lot of those underlying tech nominations, and I think
score and 3 songs.
Yeah, score and 3 songs. That's not like it's getting a bunch of like other nominations as well. Right. Of course, it
not
can't
or anything.
Yeah, it's not like it can, because of the fact that like voice performances don't get nominated, or I mean, it could get nominated, I guess, for cinematography, but or editing if it were, but it doesn't get in there. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess that's a good question, because like Beauty and the Beast got nominated a couple of years before. So, but I think
it was a phenomenon, The Lion King, as well.
Yeah, it
right
was
at the top with Forrest Gump. So
yeah. And I think Beauty and the Beast is a better film than Lion King. I think Lion King, while a good film, there are some things that I don't think that push it over the top. And I think it got, I think that there are Disney films that come out within this renaissance that are better. Like I think Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin are just better films, like in my opinion. But I think that there's no denying that it was a huge phenomenon, box office success. But I think it got the nominations in the right places. And I think if it didn't get the wins for the score, and I don't think if Elton John didn't win an Oscar for that, I would have been pissed.
There would have been a problem.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
I don't think. I think there are other films also too, like like what we talked about.
Well, yeah, there's
like,
plenty.
I think that like
year.
I think Bullets Over Broadway is in that 6th spot.
I completely agree. Yeah.
I don't think it's like Beauty and the Beast or like, the year later. I think Toy Story is a more monumental film,
right? Exactly.
In terms of animated success than something like Lion King, which is, like you said, a rehash of Hamlet, done in a very creative way, but just, how many times has Hamlet been nominated at the Oscars?
And won. Yeah. So that's fair. But I mean, it did win the Golden Globe for comedy or musical, which is
crazy.
Something.
Crazy. Yeah.
But
it's crazy that Bullets Over Broadway or Four Weddings and a Funeral.
Yeah. But I still love it. What can I say?
Oh, I love it too. I think it's Broadway musical's great, especially Circle of Life. Like you said, like that opening to a Broadway show.
Insane.
Insanely good.
Yeah. Also Ed Wood, really great. And I think it's such a shame that the movie didn't do better, because I think it's probably the closest that Tim Burton is going to get to Oscar success, honestly, unless he does something out of character at this point, because based on his track record, it doesn't seem like he would be doing something like this anytime soon. I mean, we had Big Eyes, which was its own thing, but
Big Fish.
But yeah, Big Fish, absolutely. But I think that this was probably his closest chance, and I'm glad that Martin Landau won ultimately, just based on the performance. Again, I would have given it to Samuel L. Jackson, but I'm not going to knock the win. And makeup is obviously off the charts in that movie. It's all over the place. So
it's one of Depp's great performances as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, he's really his scenes opposite Landau are fantastic. So
yeah, and I don't know if he would have made my personal top 5 ballot, but I think, based on the nominations he would ultimately get, I think this probably would rank up there as one of his best for sure.
Yeah.
And really nails the particular way of speaking that
Yes.
Ed Wood has, which is really fun. And ultimately, it's just kind of a tragic, bittersweet kind of tale, but still leaves you with this nice optimism by the end. So,
yeah,
it's nice. Bullets Over Broadway, really fun, really great, just showbiz kind of screwball comedy drama with a great cast. The Woody Allen factor is there, but ultimately, I do think that the movie is good on its own.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to talk about was Hoop Dreams, because that is considered obviously one of the most influential and best documentaries of all time. And it was a big thing that happened this year that it did not get a nomination for Best Documentary. What happened there? Well,
sometimes the Academy takes drugs and loses their freaking minds. It's like when Pan's Labyrinth didn't win foreign language film, you know what I mean? And it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It will be like if Won't You Be My Neighbor doesn't get nominated this year. It's like when the Lego Movie didn't get nominated for Best Animated Film. They do some kooky things out there. And so you're kind of like, how does a film like that not get nominated? No, I agree with you. Especially when it got editing.
It got into a craft category. How often does a documentary get into a craft technical category?
I mean, I'm hoping this year, I think Won't You Be My Neighbor would be like a wonderful Best Picture nominee. Like, I think like we deserve to have, because we've had animated films nominated before. We've had action films, we've had comedies, we've had dramas, we've had war films, we've had sci-fi, we've had foreign films. Exactly. We've never had documentary nominated for Best Picture. Ever. Yeah. Explain that to me. Like, and I guess like the narrative would be like, well, if Hoop Dreams can't even get nominated in its own category, then how the hell are other films going to? And it's like, that's not the point. These are films too. You know what I mean? And they deserve the respect. And I don't know what they were drinking when they made up these lists, but I mean, those 5 other nominees, they don't have nearly the cachet, the rememberability.
No, they don't have the staying power. Yeah.
No, they don't have a disc dedicated to them in the Criterion Collection. I mean, like,
God, yeah.
this film is very influential, and I mean, like, especially when we have so many things that go on with athletes in terms of being paid for colleges under the table and NCAA violations and things like that. It's still a very timely film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, heck, even a couple of years later, Spike Lee does He Got Game, and and there's tons of examples of films using this as influence, not just on a sports spectrum, but as a documentary spectrum. I mean, it's such an important film. So I don't, to answer the question, I don't know why. And it's really kind of sad.
Well, there's an interesting story here that I found, which is our friend Roger Ebert. He wrote a little piece because he was very angry, as many people were, after Hoop Dreams did not get Best Documentary nomination. So he wrote a piece about how there were reliable sources who said that basically the way they did the documentary nominating in the committee was they had a system in which they would basically wave a flashlight on screen when they gave up on the film. And when a majority of the lights flashed, the film was turned off.
What?
And Hoop Dreams, listen to this. Hoop Dreams did not even make it to 20 minutes.
Wow. Oh my God, that's awful. Like, could you imagine doing that for like narrative films? Like, this was test audience, or was this Academy screenings?
This was in the documentary nominating committee.
So this is in the branch.
Academy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, could you imagine like them sitting there? Like, I could just imagine them like a couple of years ago when they did the whole like, oh, I haven't seen 12 Years a Slave and I won't, but like, but I'm gonna give it to Best Picture because you kind of have to. Could you imagine if like they sat all those people in a room and made them watch like these films and then they did that and we found out? Like, would Moonlight have won Best Picture? Would Shape of Water won Best Picture? You know what I mean?
I don't know.
You don't know. So like, to do that in your own branch, I mean, that's also the power of Roger Ebert. Like, still, like, Roger, I mean, imagine, Kevin, you and I writing a article where it exposes the Academy and they still love you. You know what I mean? You do that nowadays, you're shunned from society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just tells you, but it also tells you like, too, like, how long did they do that and continue to do it afterwards until they had to stop?
There's a part two to that, to answer that question. They basically changed it the next year.
Yeah, kind of have
in response, more or less, because also I guess they had a way of doing the nominations where they ranked, or not ranked, but rated the movies from 1 to 10. And basically what they found was that, or actually 0 to 10. And what they found was that people were literally just putting 10s for the 5 movies that they liked and 0s for everything else.
Jesus.
And basically they had to average out to the right amount. And
that's bad.
Essentially he says that there was one movie that got a lot of 10s that didn't get in because it had so many 0s, and it was pushed to 6th place. I wonder what movie that was. So there you go. Yeah.
One of the most influential documentaries of all time. You know what I mean?
But I just like reading that story. It just sounds so crass, like such a crass way of just like of choosing nominations for something. Just like waving flashlights angrily. Like, what is that?
Yeah. It's like, have you ever seen Animal House, where they put the pictures up of the new the new guys that are gonna enter the frat, and then like when Flounder's face gets thrown up there, they like start throwing beer cans at it. That's what exactly that sounds like. That's what
it is on a classier level.
Yeah, on a on a Pinot Noir level. You know what I mean? So
just wave my flashlight at the screen.
I've put my pinky away for this movie. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. So that is a real unfortunate thing that happened, but I'm glad that they made steps to not have that sort of thing happen again.
Yeah.
So that's that. Are there any other movies that you wanted to highlight? I think we covered pretty much all of them.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think, well, Heavenly Creatures.
Oh, yes, that's a good one.
that was one that got in the screenplay nominations. That's one of Peter Jackson's first films.
Peter Jackson before Lord of the Rings, people.
And Kate Winslet before Titanic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And really, really good movie. Like I was kind of real dark, but like under the radar. And one last thing is Shallow Grave. We get Danny Boyle, who obviously you talked about his Slumdog on that Benjamin Button episode.
Yep.
And it gave us Ewan McGregor, and it's one of those films that is in the Criterion Collection, and it's a memorable debut. And of course, then a couple years later, he brings out Trainspotting and changes the indie landscape. Yeah. Yes, which changes the indie landscape. So this is when we've got our first taste of Danny Boyle, and so yeah, it's kind of memorable for that, for those two huge directors now that we know. One's still trying to see if he's going to meddle in Hobbitland, and then the other one just got released from Bond. So that's where they're at in their careers. But yeah, and this year they were small little fishes in the big pond.
Yeah, and also Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, I mean, well,
basically the origin story for him is the big thing, I think, of the whole year. But
exactly,
yeah. Again, lots of fun origin stories in the 90s. Lots of really terrible people in the 90s. Welcome to the Oscars.
That's
okay.
True.
So when we come back, we will be making our verdict. So up in the air, right? About whether we think Forrest Gump deserved to win Best Picture, or if Pulp Fiction maybe should have taken it. How about that idea? All right. We'll be back.
The nominees for Best Picture of the Year are Forrest Gump, Wendy Feinerman, Steve Tisch, Steve Starkey, my eyes, producers. Four Weddings and a Funeral, Duncan Kenworthy, producer. Pulp Fiction, Lawrence Bender, producer.
Quiz Show, Robert Redford, Michael Jacobs, Julian Cranen, Michael Nozick, producers. The Shawshank Redemption, Nicky Marvin, producer. And the Oscar goes to Forrest Gump, Wendy Fitterman, Steve Tisch, and Steve Starkey, producers.
And we're back. So now we are going to make our verdict as to whether we think Forrest Gump maybe did deserve that Best Picture win, or if Pulp Fiction should have taken it. Ryan McQuade, what is your answer?
My answer is that Forrest Gump should have never been nominated for Best Picture.
Whoa.
Is one of the worst wins of the decade, if not of all time, for Best Picture, in my humble opinion. Such a cliched, embarrassing film that has not aged well. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but you know what, guys, Kevin wouldn't have me on the show if I didn't have a scolding take, something like that.
You just have a lot of strong feelings.
I have a lot of strong feelings, especially about films that feel like they are insulting the audience and their intelligence.
That's definitely fair.
And that's why I have strong opinions about Forrest Gump. Now, I love Pulp Fiction. If I had to choose out of these nominees, I wouldn't choose Pulp Fiction to be Best Picture, probably.
How dare you?
I would probably say that it would go to Shawshank Redemption. And I know that everyone's going to go like, oh, you're just like the IMDb guy. But no, I think that film is so beautiful and so underrated from that year and doesn't get a lot of love. And people remember these two films, these two, gladiators fighting in the ring for Best Picture. But that second film would be Pulp Fiction. And I think that Pulp Fiction and Shawshank are two perfect films that encapsulate the 90s, encapsulate that, one's a kind of a bigger Hollywood film, I guess. In Shawshank, it feels like a studio film, like something that they make to get people in the seats, even though they got nobody in the seats. And Pulp Fiction is an example of the independent film community working on a mass audience scale. Pulp Fiction is more memorable, I think, than Shawshank, beyond my personal opinions. Pulp Fiction is Quentin Tarantino's most important film of his career. Without this, we don't get what we see in the 2000s, and he doesn't get his blank check for now. It's the most important film of its respected decade. I love Pulp Fiction. I know I kind of sound contradicting when I say that Shawshank should beat it, but I don't care. That's what I would have voted at the time, and that's what I would still kind of vote today. But Pulp Fiction deserves it immensely over Forrest Gump, and Forrest Gump should be handing over the Oscars now. It wasn't Bob Zemeckis' time at all, Steven Spielberg. It was Quentin Tarantino's time. And the sad thing is about Tarantino is with the revelations that came out about Kill Bill and the revelations, of course, and his connections with Weinstein and whatnot, I don't think he'll ever win another Academy Award again, based on the new Academy. And I'm not saying, it's a shame that he'll never win it because of those things. It's a shame because he should have already won all those things.
Yeah.
And he was a bystander, and I don't think he's an accomplice. I think he was a bystander to disgusting things that happened, and nobody ever in these Oscar races pulled for him, and that's why he lost. Well, I say today is his day of reckoning, and I think Quentin Tarantino should get 3 Oscars for that year, because if Iñárritu's got 4, Tarantino should have now 4 as well. And so I say that Pulp Fiction should totally be the film for this Oscar year.
Very good. Well, I will just note on a technicality that he was not a producer, nominated producer for Best Picture. But I absolutely agree. He should have won director for sure. And I think Pulp Fiction is miles better than Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is far and away my number 5 of this Best Picture lineup. And it just doesn't even hold a candle. And I think it's so interesting looking at these two movies.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they both have these different soundtracks that people remember them by. But even looking at it and isolating that element, you look at the Pulp Fiction soundtrack and everything that accentuates for the movie, and you look at Forrest Gump, so lazy, so uninspired, just so obvious, just basically playing to the baby boomers who are in the audience, and in this case in the Academy, of which there were a majority.
Yeah.
So, that's another factor here. But ultimately Pulp Fiction just is so influential and so great. And I do understand that Shawshank Redemption argument too, and I think that's a super duper strong number 2 for me, but I have to say Pulp Fiction is number 1.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. So I rest my case. So thank you so much, Ryan, for this very in-depth discussion. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. This is everything I wanted to be a part of with this show. I've been such a big fan of yours, and when I heard you were asking for guests, I immediately jumped. And most people will just ignore a guy that was kind of at the time not really in our neck of the woods in terms of the race, the discussion. But you're such a gracious person to have me on, and I hope we really can do this again down the road.
Thank you. That'd be amazing. So tell the people where they can find you on the internet.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan McQuade 77. You can find my writings on InSessionFilm.com. I will have a review shortly up of the new Ethan Hawke directed film Blaze. We just announced on Extra Film, which has already come out, that I will be one of the new permanent co-hosts of the Extra Film segment of InSession Film's podcast network. And also coming in September, I will be doing for InSession Film a monthly or bi-monthly Oscar kind of roundtable discussion. We haven't really locked down the title yet, so I don't want to say what it is. We have a working title, so I don't want to kind of like have to withdraw my working title down the road. But just suffice it to say, it'll be a roundtable discussion on one topic from those 2 weeks or a week. and then we'll give Oscar predictions or have some sort of way of predicting things in the second half of that show. And Kevin, you are more than welcome when you are busy, when you're done busy with your schedule and whatnot, to come on that show and be a guest. I would love to have you on.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for the kind words. You can find me on the internet at Kevin_Jacobson. You can find the show at Oscar Runner Up. You can find the show at Apple Podcasts /iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, where you can rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks. And now I turn it to you, listening at home, to vote on whether you think Forrest Gump deserved to win Best Picture, or if, as we have clearly outlined, Pulp Fiction was better and deserved it. And you could do that at my website at filmtrophies.com or email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So thank you again, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
I will bid you all adieu.